Chapter 14. Mason. Mason opened his eyes and blinked against the bright lights. Where was he? This was not his room. It was too white and too sterile. His own room was painted a soft blue and the walls were covered with framed pictures of famous players. These walls were pale and impersonal. And then he remembered. The injury. He tried to replay the scene in his mind, but all he could remember was jumping up for the catch and then landing all wrong. He rolled his head to the side. Surely someone had come with him to the hospital. Maybe they would know more. A form was curled up in a chair, but it took him a moment to realize who it was. Clara? They had sent Clara to the hospital with him? For a moment, he wondered why, but he decided he didn't care. He was actually glad it was Clara. Not only did he trust her, but he knew she would tell it to him straight. Besides, she looked beautiful there in the chair with her strawberry blonde hair spilling over her face. As if sensing his gaze on her, she opened her eyes and blinked at him. "Oh, you're awake." She rubbed her eyes and yawned before stretching to a standing position. "How long have I been out?" He had no concept of time. The room had no windows, and the bright lights made it feel like noon, when he knew it had to be much later. "A few hours. You were dazed when they brought you in, and then I think they gave you something for the pain." She touched the side of his bed, as if wanting to touch his arm, but afraid of what he might say or do. "Do you feel any pain?" He closed his eyes and tried to assess his pain, but everything still felt a little hazy. "I'm not feeling much of anything right now." His eyes flicked to hers. "How bad is it, though?" When her teeth bit down on her bottom lip and her eyes slid to the side, he knew it was bad. "Am I out for the rest of the season?" This couldn't be happening. They had a chance at the championship game again, and he wouldn't be able to play? "I think so." Sadness creased her features, even as concern filled her eyes. "Did I at least hold on to the ball?" She chuckled and shook her head. "Yeah, you did. I don't know if the team managed to score off it because I was a little busy being concerned about you, but you held on to the ball." "You were concerned about me?" He didn't know why, but the words sent a thrill through his chest. If she was concerned, did that mean she still cared about him? Her head tilted to the side, and tiny wrinkles furrowed her brow. Had he said something confusing? "Of course I was concerned about you. It's kind of my job." Right, her job. That was probably the only reason she was here as well. They'd probably made her come, being lowest on the seniority poll. "You don't remember anything after the catch?" Why was she looking at him like that? Had he made a giant fool of himself somehow? "Not really. I vaguely remember hitting the ground, pain, and then waking up here." "Oh." Was she disappointed? She sounded disappointed, but he had no idea why she would be. "Did I do something? Say something that I should know about?" She opened her mouth to speak and then sighed. "No, I'm sure it's nothing." He was absolutely sure it was something, but as she didn't seem to want to talk about it, he decided not to push. It would probably come back to him sooner or later, and he could deal with the embarrassment then. "So, how bad is it?" he asked, changing the topic. Her face had already told him it was bad, but he needed to hear just how bad. "The doctor hasn't been in yet, but I'm fairly certain it's torn, Mason. Your Achilles." Torn. That was very bad news. He'd done enough research when he was looking up Achilles tendonitis to know that his season was over, and most of his summer would be spent in rehab. "Do you know my options?" "It depends on how bad it is, but from what I understand, there are two options. One is non-surgical, but it might take a little longer, and there are some increased chances of re-rupturing it. The other option is surgery. It's quicker but more painful, and not without risk." "Surgery it is, then." Mason said as soon as she'd finished. But Mason, there are risks with surgery too, and you'll still be out 4 to 6 months minimum. 4 to 6 months was not the news he wanted to hear. That would run right into summer training time. If he missed that, would they even play him next season? If he was lucky, he could catch the last few weeks or month of training camp, and maybe he'd get really lucky and heal faster. Or his recovery would go so smoothly that he'd be back at peak performance and they'd have to start him. It's the best option to be able to play again. I'm already going to miss a lot of summer training camp. If I miss all of it, I may not get to play in the next season. Would that be so bad? Her voice was so soft that he wasn't even sure he had heard her. I can't not play, Clara. It's all I've ever wanted. She nodded, but he wasn't sure she understood. She had come from money. Her father had owned the biggest business in their hometown, and Clara had never wanted for anything. He, on the other hand, had grown up without much. He'd known hunger and frustration and how hard his parents had worked. He needed the money now, not only to feel secure, but to help his parents out. They had sacrificed so much for him. The door opened, and a man in scrubs and a white coat appeared. "Ah, you're awake. That's good. How's the pain?" He sanitized his hands and then sat at the stool nearest the computer in the room. Mason put on his best poker face. "Not bad right now, but I'm assuming it will get worse when the pain medication wears off?" The doctor nodded. "It will be sore, for sure, but depending on the route we take, we'll get you some medication to help with any pain." Mason struggled to sit up and make himself seem assertive. It was rather hard to do in a hospital gown, especially when his legs still felt a little like jello. "I want surgery, as soon as possible." The doctor blinked at him and then looked over at Clara, who shrugged. "We haven't even performed the MRI yet. We have to do that before I can discuss options." His hand clenched the thin sheet covering him. "I'm a professional athlete, Doc. I need to be able to play. Is surgery my best option?" The doctor turned on the stool and stared evenly at Mason before nodding. "Depending on the tear and what the MRI shows, then yes, possibly." Mason lifted his chin and stared evenly at the doctor. "Then let's get the MRI and see what it shows." "I'll get it scheduled." He tapped for a few minutes on the keyboard, pushed back from the stool, and then left the room. Mason tried to settle back and relax, but it was impossible. His mind kept racing through the scenarios and what-if questions. He knew he would have to be patient, but that was easier said than done.